Webinar, more detail on our level being webinar 9 mastery more detail on our level being 9 mastery program. Wow! Mastery program. Level being 9 mastery.
Well, wonderful beekeepers, welcome to the second part of our introduction to the science of beekeeping. We have two very, very fabulous beekeepers following through on the first stage. So, Beekeeper Katy and Beekeeper Abenah, welcome to You Learn Naturally Radio. We've done an introduction to the first part, so I'm going to take it that most people are going to take it from the beginning. So let's just flow straight in. Beekeeper Katy, please continue your flow.
Right, so I think we left the situation talking about bees' anatomy. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the different sorts of bees that are in the hive. Now, the bee castes, as they're called, are the males, which are the drones, the queen, who is the fertile female and lays all the eggs, and the workers, who are infertile females, and they do all the work. So the drone is physically rather different to the queen and the worker, and he has very large wing muscles, and he has very big eyes, and he needs bees to go on the mating flight with the queen. The queen is different to the workers because she has a far longer abdomen, which enables her to bend herself round and lay eggs into the individual cells in the honeycomb. And the worker is quite literally the one who does all the work, and she will look after the brood because the queen is laying, between 1.5 and maybe even in a very productive between 2,000 eggs a day. So she hasn't really got time to look after all those kids. So it's going to be the workers who are doing that. And they're also going out gathering the food for the colony, and they will also feed the queen because she is too busy laying eggs to go out and get her own food. And they will also feed the drones because they don't go out and gather their own food either. So obviously, with all the jobs that they do in the hive and the different castes of bees, how do they all communicate? How do they sort of know what to do? And one of the most important aspects of bee communication is pheromones. And these are hormonal scents that are released. There's quite often people will talk about human beings with pheromones, but scientifically speaking, although people definitely each have their own unique smell, and there is also sort of like the smell of fear and things like that, humans are not considered to have pheromones. These are very much specific chemicals which are produced and which the rest of the body will react to. So, pheromones control development and reproduction, including queen mating and swarming.
Sorry, just as you, Katy, just on that point you've just made there, do you have clarity on the principal difference between that distinction?
I think that's something I would probably have to look into so I get exactly the right nomenclature, but I think pheromones are something that are very, very specific. So, no one's going to walk into the room and think, oh, everyone smells hungry, I better cook dinner. But this is the sort of thing that will be communicated by pheromones within the bee colony. The larvae will produce scent, where the nurse bees know that this particular larva is hungry and needs feeding. So I think it's the specificity which is the thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So they also sort of control foraging, as in which flowers to go to and which flowers have already been visited. The defence of the colony, because if bees sting, there is like an attack pheromone. So if the bees know that another bee has been injured or has stung something, they will be recruited to investigate what's going on and very possibly mount an attack on whoever is causing the problems. Orientation and where the bee sort of is, and also communication between the queens and the workers, between the workers and between the queens and the drones, between adults and the brood. And this is a massive topic which I'll be discussing more clearly in a further podcast. So the most important pheromones I'm just going to touch on very quickly now, and this is something called the queen signal or the queen substance or the queen pheromone. So these are all the same thing, just given different names, and they're produced by the queen. And if the queen is producing a lot of pheromone, then the other worker bees will surround her in what they call retinue behaviour. So it's like they're bowing down to her. They will also cluster the swarm of bees together when they're swarming off to find a new home, and this will also attract the drones for mating. If there is less of this queen substance being given off by the queen, then this will trigger the colony to perhaps create a new queen. It will also mean that the workers are not receiving the sort of the queen signal, and they will start to lay eggs themselves. But of course they're unfertilized eggs, so they can only turn into male drones, which is something I'll discuss a bit later. But also in different combinations that will encourage worker activities such as comb building, brood feeding, foraging, and guard duty as well. So this can also be partly directed from the queen. So the more defensive colonies that are more likely to go out and sting you, this is very often controlled by the queen pheromone, or it can be controlled by the genetics of the queen. So you've got those two options, which if you're a beekeeper, will you'll try and solve the problem one way and then perhaps end up having to solve it a different way. Now, the glands that produce all these pheromones, there are loads of them in the honeybees. So there's one in the jaw called the mandibular gland. There's one in the head at the front, sort of like the forehead, which is the hypopharyngeal gland. There's one at the top of the head, which is the head labial gland. There's the thoracic gland, the tergite glands on the back. There's something called the Nasanov gland towards the rear of the abdomen. And then there are glands producing wax, poison gland, which is part of the sting. And one of the most important ones is the Nasanov gland, because this is the one which secretes a substance which keeps the colony together, and the workers will distribute pheromone from this gland to let the rest of the colony know that they know where the queen is. So if the queen is going off to swarm, the workers will produce this scent so that the other workers know that they're in the right place if they want to join the swarm. So that's sort of quite complicated, but that's unfortunately a simplified version. Now, of those glands, the other really important one is the hypopharyngeal gland in the sort of forehead area, and this is where workers produce a high-protein solution which is fed to the larvae. So this is the royal jelly. So ordinary worker bees are fed this just for a couple of days, and then they're fed a mixture of nectar and pollen called bee bread. But the queen bee is fed purely on royal jelly from the hypopharyngeal gland, and this is why she developed into a sexually mature female rather than just a worker. So it really, any egg can turn into a queen. It's entirely how the larvae are fed which determines whether or not they become sexually mature or whether they are going to be workers. So it just goes to show how important diet is.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So On the bees' feet, they produce something called the tarsal pheromone. So the queen produces a scent from her feet, and as she's walking around the hive, it really prevents the construction of swarm cells because they can smell the queen is walking about the hive, so they know she's all right. And in workers, this scent is used to mark the hive entrance, so they know where they live and they can get back to it. And also, it indicates whether forage has been visited, so they'll leave sort of little smelly footprints. So other bees who have been directed to that forage will know they've come to the right place. So it's all quite complicated, but there is another way which bees can communicate, in which the queen bee can communicate, and that is through sound. And what the queen bee can do is vibrate her abdomen on the honeycomb and make a really interesting chirping sound. So I'm going to see if I can play that to you now.
Okay, so today I have a short video for you that should be fun and entertaining. What you see on the screen here in the upper left is a queen cell, and there has been a swarm that departed from this observation hive. So what's going on is there are several queen cells within this hive, and one is visible, but you're going to hear queens piping inside these cells, and what they're doing is communicating to one another pre-emergent. Now once they do hatch, they may continue to pipe a little bit, and it sends a vibration out, and that allows them to find each other, and I hope they don't fight, but the first one to emerge will seek out the others through this piping sound and kill them off. So listen, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed that and found those audible recordings interesting. And in closing, I want you to watch the queen cell now and see the workers that are grabbing it and vibrating as if to respond and let her know that they're on the outside, ready to attend to her the moment she is ready to be hatched out. Thanks for watching, and I hope you continue to enjoy these little interesting bits of action inside. our observation hive.
So that's the sound that the queen makes, and quite often a newly emerged queen will make that sound, and the other queens that are still haven't emerged yet but are mature will actually reply. And I've heard that sound being made in the hive, and it's quite sort of magical, but it's mostly a vibration rather than a sound that she's sort of actually making herself. So she's vibrating herself against the honeycomb, and it's a way of the worker bees knowing that the queen is sort of there and has emerged successfully. And also sometimes the workers can make that sound as well. But I just thought it was quite interesting, so I'd play it.
It is interesting.
So
one moment.
Same.
No, go on.
Okay.
Go on.
They can vibrate. The workers can also make that vibration because they're a bit smaller. I don't think it sounds quite the same. I mean, it's possible, but they don't do it as the queen is sort of renowned for doing it. And interestingly enough, in one of in the book on Egyptology, which I read, there's a painting which looks as though the hieroglyphics that go with it imply that the person in front of the hive is either singing to the bees or playing a wind instrument to the bees. And there's this idea that maybe they are playing a noise to the bees, and if the queen is present, she will pipe back, so they know that the colony is queen-right and there's a queen present who's laying eggs. So that's something I'm going to investigate further.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was just on the notion of sound. I often wondered if playing music while I was checking the hive would be good for them or not.
I don't know. It's very, very interesting. Yeah, because I, not in keeping with my other colleagues in the Beekeeping Association, I talk to my bees when I'm going through them. I mean, quite a few people do, but, I'll say hello to them when I take the roof off, and I'll just have a general chat to them while I'm working away.
Yeah.
And I do wonder whether that helps, but at least they know it's me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again.
Mummy's here.
Quite often, yeah, exactly. And, I don't know whether they like it or not, but, I think sound is also clearly important. So now I'm going to move on to the worker bee.
I was going to ask something.
Oh, yeah, go on. Sorry, Mr. Murray.
I was interested when you said you had heard it yourself. You'd heard the queen making that sound.
Yeah.
That
just
was
by pure luck. Well, I have to say, a lot of my beekeeping, I mean, I think Abenah will confirm that in the first few years it was a bit haphazard, isn't it?
Yeah. I was thinking to myself, it's a sound I should have heard as well by now, so I'm not even sure.
No, it's quite striking, and it is sufficiently loud so that you can hear it outside of the hive. But they make it's not a frequent sound. So unless you sort of literally have a bee that's just emerged. I mean, when you do swarm control, you have these extra queens, and depending on how you want to do your beekeeping, if you have a colony where you think the queen is lost or is failing, you can transfer the queen cell, which hasn't yet emerged, into the hive that you think is not doing very well, and then they will hopefully adopt the queen you've introduced in. Now, you can get like a plastic cage called a queen cage, and you're supposed to do it all properly, or alternatively you can discover that you've got a colony where you've got some queen cells and one that's missing. But of course the queen cell itself just looks like an unshelled peanut, so you can't really tell how old the queen is that you are removing. So I remove removed a queen cell to put in another hive, and rather astonishingly, as I was trying to carefully put it into the wax of the hive I was going to put it in, the queen popped out. They have a little sort of escape hatch at the bottom of the queen cell, and off they go. So she ran out and started typing, and I was utterly astonished. But I think you're supposed to be doing it in a rather more organised fashion.
Oh, wow.
That sounds like a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Oh, it was, absolutely. So I think I think the how the worker bees are created just purely from what diet they've been given, I've covered. So when a worker bee emerges, the first thing that she will do is clean out the comb cell that she has developed in, and the other bees will not help the emerging bees. They'll just literally walk over their faces. It's up to them to chew the wax capping off the cell that they've developed in and get off and start cleaning things. So after a while cleaning up their own comb and the combs of others, the hypopharyngeal gland kicks in and they start to feed the larvae. And then the next job after feeding the larvae, because obviously the amount of matter in the hypopharyngeal gland eventually is used up, so they then can move on to something called climate control. Now this is where they will be either within the hive vibrating their wing muscles to keep things warm, or alternatively they can be on around the entrance of the hive. If they're inside the hive, they can vibrate their wings and it pulls cooler air into the hive to cool it down if it's too hot. Or they can sort of face the other way and they can pull hot air out of the hive to go out into the general atmosphere to cool things down as well. So the other job in the hive that they can proceed on to next is the removal of dead bees. And these bees are called mortuary bees. And when a bee dies, they will just pick up the corpse and just take it out of the hive. Now, some bees are rather tidier than others. So you get some colonies where there's some dead bees in the bottom, and you just think, oh gosh, there's something terrible happened. But it just means they don't like housework, and they just haven't taken the dead bees out. Other colonies, they will remove them quite far away. Others will just chuck them out the entrance, and you'll see the dead bees littering the ground. But most of the time, unless there's an excessive number, you know the hive is okay. And there are birds quite like hopping around because they eat the dead bees because they've all got a tiny little bit of honey in them. So blue tips and robins we've spotted at the divisional apiary sort of hopping around in front of the hives and eating up the dead bees.
Just on that, what I've observed with my bees, because my hive is in my garden, I have a path that goes down the garden to the hive. And the first year, I noticed bees walking down the path, like kind of almost as if they were a little bit drunk or disorientated. And they'd walk up the path like, as if coming towards the patio door. So I don't think, I can't, in my head, I thought, well, they all are going in a specific direction, which is north.
Well, that's very interesting because...
And I'm thinking, is it a directional thing that they're doing? Because some I see outside the hive, like over the winter season, I'm seeing them right outside the hive entrance. But during the year, during the summer, the ones that are dying walk up the path. They just make their way towards.
That's very interesting because you described them as sort of moving as though they're a bit drunk. Were they sort of shaking or trembling or?
Some of them were, some of them weren't. But they were. To me, they were dying. So it's like where elephants go to a graveyard.
Yeah, it sounds to me like that is chronic bee paralysis virus because that's exactly the sort of behaviour you get from bees who are infected with this, and quite often it's in large, successful colonies. It's quite a easily transmitted virus, pardon me, and what will happen is that if the bees succumb to it, when they try and get back into the hive, the guard bees, which is the job, pardon me, I'm coming on to next, they will prevent them coming in. So these bees were just left sort of all wandering around and disorientated on the ground outside. And they will, I suppose they'll just wander about and then something will come along and eat them, but the colony won't let them get back in. So if you spot that again, the good thing would be to have a quick look on the NBU website, which has got some photos of bees with chronic bee paralysis virus. And then possibly your colony might need more room for the bees because that reduces the transmission. But we're going to have a talk on chronic bee paralysis virus in the Beekeeping Association, so that's another source of information.
Okay. So, but they all got, to me what was fascinating is that they all were walking in the same direction.
Well, I don't know. Well, we're going to go on to a bit about how bees navigate in another podcast, so maybe that might have some bearing on it.
Yeah. Okay.
So, as the bees progress through these jobs, they're sort of gradually getting closer and closer to the outside world. So prior to this, they won't have actually been exposed to the world generally. So what they now do is act as guard bees, and they will sort of be around the entrance of the hive on the inside, and if any creatures try to get into the hive, and we're sort of looking at things like wasps that might want to come in and rob the hive, or mice, because mice like nice warm places to nest, and the hive is very cosy. And a couple of colleagues of mine have had to remove mice out of their hives where the bees have just stung the mice to death. So I'm going to talk a little bit about bee stings now. So only the worker bees and the queen can sting. The drones don't have the right apparatus because it's believed to have been evolved from the egg-laying apparatus of the original bees way back in the tree of arthropods, which I showed at the beginning of the last podcast.
Sorry, before you go on, Katy, the mice and them settling in, is there any situation where they can sort of get on and be there, or is it always a situation where they'll be driven out or killed?
What can happen is that depending on the strength of the colony, if the guarding bees are a good strong colony, they will dispatch the mouse. And also the beekeeper at the mouse sort of season, which is in the autumn when mice want somewhere warm to live, you have to put on something called a mouse guard because mice can deform their skulls in such a way that they can get through tiny gaps, and the rest of the body will sort of follow, so they can actually get through very, very small gaps. So you have to put a grid on the front of your hive to prevent the mice getting in. Now, one thing that bees don't like is the smell of mouse urine, and unfortunately, mice leave a trail of urine wherever they go. They don't have a bladder in the same way that human beings do, and this is a way that mice can locate where other mice are. So they leave this trail of urine. And the bees really don't like that very much, and it can make them leave the colony if the mouse has settled in. And of course the mouse will eat the honey and the larvae and chew up the comb and get up to all sorts of mousy mischief. So if they start doing that, then the bees either have to defend their colony or depart. So that's what the mice get up to. Shall I carry on about stings?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, the honeybee venom itself is produced in glands next to the actual physical sting, and the venom increases in production during the first 2 weeks of the adult worker's life. So while she's within the hive and not exposed to the outside world doing the sort of like she's doing the cleaning duties and other things, her level of venom is building up. And then it's at its maximum when she's involved in hive defense and foraging. But the queen bee's production of venom is at its highest when she first emerges, and this is possibly because some queens will actually go around and sting the queens that haven't emerged yet, the other ones that are in their cells waiting to come out. And that is something I've actually seen, because in yet another of my abysmal beekeeping failures, I had some queen cells which I took out of the hive, and astonishingly, 2 queen bees emerged literally in my hand, and one immediately stung the other to death. So, I know, I've made some awful messes in my time. I was just gobsmacked because it happened so quickly. My friend was literally standing next to me, and I said, "Oh, Linda, it's the queen bees merged." The next thing I knew, they were both out having a punch-up, and she didn't even get a chance to really see what was going on. She just saw me with like a live bee in one hand and a dead bee in the other. So it's pretty amazing, I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the principal reasons, though, that bees sting are not just for mice. I mean, everybody sort of thinks of little Winnie the Pooh who loves honey flying along in his balloon to get to the hive of bees. In fact, actual bears really do love honey, and they will tear apart an apiary. I mean, it's particularly a problem in Russia, but also in the USA where they have bears. And the reason why bees sting is to defend their hives from large hairy mammals. Now, this does have a little bit of a downside because, of course, human beings are also large, fairly hairy mammals. So if you stick your head in front of a beehive with no bee suit on and go, "Oh, look, how the little bee is cute," they're going to think, "Oh, this could be a bear." In fact, Abenah and I have a mutual friend called Eric who decided he was going to look at his hives, and he was wearing a big fluffy brown jumper, and little bees came out and got stuck in his jumper. And I think Abenah will acknowledge that Eric is very tall and extremely thin, so they probably thought he was a very hungry bear and decided to get out there and investigate. So the worker bee stings are barbed. Now, one of the main differences between humans and hairy mammals is that human skin is actually comparatively tough because, of course, we don't have that external protection of hair. So if you sort of check the skin on your scalp, it's actually a lot thinner and more delicate than the skin on your hands. So when a worker bee stings you on the hand or elsewhere, the sting is barbed and it actually embeds itself in your skin. And what happens is the worker bee will move away from the sting site, and the sting remains in the human skin, and she will literally turn herself inside out. So the sting is quite sort of beautiful, actually, unless it's sticking in you, I suppose. And it's got a muscle in it which will pump the venom in. So if you get stung by a bee, the thing to do is to either with your fingernail or something like that, just sort of scratch down and get the sting barb out, and then that will reduce the amount of venom that goes in and make it a bit less painful. Now, there are a lot of enzymes in bee venom, and there are a few of them actually tie in with the immune cells, which I was talking about, the human immune cells, which I was talking about at the end of the last podcast. And this is where we get into trouble with things like sensitivity to bee stings and anaphylaxis. If the human immune system decides that this foreign substance that's just entered into the bloodstream is really dangerous, they will mount a large immune response, and then you can get swelling of your limb where you've been stung, or in the worst case scenario, you'll actually get anaphylaxis, where the body mounts a massive immune response to the sting, and you will get your trachea, your lungs, and your windpipe will swell up and actually shut down. You'll get an accelerated heart rate, and it can be fatal. And it is extremely rare, but that's how anaphylaxis works. And of course, you can have sensitivity to bee stings, you can have sensitivity to wasp stings, and some people have sensitivity to both. So
have you seen someone
really,
in that kind of shock?
So Sorry?
Have you seen someone in that kind of shock? Have you seen a person experience that?
No. I mean, the thing is, people respond to bee stings and wasp stings in very different ways. Now, we had a very interesting talk from a woman who is the anaphylaxis and immunity nurse at Imperial College, and she does special bee sting therapy for beekeepers who have become sensitized to bees. And what you can do is give them venom in a controlled fashion and obviously stay with them until the immune system thinks, oh, well, whatever this stuff is, I'm just bored with it now. I'm not going to mount a massive immune response. And she said that it's actually extremely difficult to differentiate between somebody who's going into anaphylaxis and somebody who is having a panic attack. So in all the divisional apiaries, we have a sign on the door which says what the signs and symptoms are of anaphylaxis, and if you suspect it, you should call an ambulance, and it includes like the postcode, so that we, because obviously if you're standing in a place you're not that familiar with, you need to be able to tell the ambulance where to go, so it's got the postcode, so that you can get an ambulance to the person as quickly as possible. Because generally speaking, the ambulance people are much happier to come to visit a beekeeper who's actually feeling a lot better than to not come to a beekeeper who's dead. So, if if you think that the person has gone into anaphylaxis, it's far better to call an ambulance than not. So if you have been stung, you get the perception that it's very hot. And in fact, I've got a thermal imaging picture which shows that there's a 7-degree temperature difference in an area that's been stung. So this perception that it's very hot is actually genuine.
I would agree with that, because I've had a few things myself, and initially I didn't really have much reaction, but maybe on the third thing, which was on the base of my thumb, my whole hand, the whole area swelled up within the day, and the next day it felt hot and it felt almost itchy. But I was quite fascinated at how the area was hot.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It had risen, so yes, what you're saying, I resonate with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, as I've explained, I've gotten into myself in those terrible pickles. I had a gap in my bee suit between the bottom of the leg of the bee suit and my boot, and I just had a whole load of bees just shot down into my boot and stung my ankle, and I ended up with my one leg like 3 times the size of the other leg. It was really bad, and I met somebody who was a nurse, and it was like standing there talking to someone. This is obviously pre-C19. She kept on looking at my legs, going, "I think you should get that. It doesn't look right." And I said, "No, it's fine." And the next day it was, but it wasn't great. But it's just, I mean, for me, it's just part of the, you are occasionally going to get stung.
I think. So just to interrupt your flows, I think at this point, our listeners who are not beekeepers must be wondering why would the two of you continue to do a thing that does this to you? Let me interject before you answer my question about why you continue, even with those experiences, as you clearly have a love of beekeeping. I had a very lovely conversation with beekeeper Connell in Uganda. He's part of the Bennett community yesterday. And we spoke a bit about this, because I know there's a lot of research around some possible healing properties of bee stings. And he confirmed that in his culture, they identify it like that. They have some clear indigenous knowledge about the benefits of being stung by bees. And he sent me some videos showing me beekeepers in some very, very, what looked like very hairy situations in terms of swarms of bees, and they're barehanded working in the space when others around them are in the full suit. And that point you made about the conditioning of the skin is interesting, and the ability to develop a kind of harmony with it, with the chemicals that are being injected into the body. Yeah, it's there's more to it. There's more to it. So anyway, how do you continue when you have these experiences?
Webinar 9, more detail mastery. On our level being webinar 9 mastery program. Detail on level being 9 mastery program. Wow! Mastery program. Level being 9 mastery.
You go first, Abenah, because you haven't been doing this as long as me. Why do you carry on?
For me, I expected that at some point I am going to be stung, and if you don't get stung, you're not really a beekeeper. So, and I love beekeeping. It's not like the bees are naughty children. They're doing what they do because that's how they are. That's their purpose. They feel that they need to put a defense up. They will defend. So they're doing what they do naturally. So I'm not gonna look at them as to say, oh, they've attacked me or anything. I can't do this anymore. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of that. And I love the beekeeping aspect, and I love honey. So I continue, and I guess that's the bottom line for me. Mm-hmm. You're the love of doing what you do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's I usually think if I've been stung, generally it's because I've accidentally I've been moving the frames in the hive and I've sort of caught a bee in my, under a frame, or a bee has got sort of caught in my bee suit and managed to sting me through it, or something like that. Generally speaking, unless you have a particularly defensive colony, you are not, they're not going to sting you for no reason. They're not just going to come out and go, oh, I'm going to sting you, unless there's some sort of threat. Now, the problem is, of course, that bees, with their wonderful sense of smell and pheromone-based communications, there are a variety of things that you could smell of that bees are not going to like. Now, these include bananas, alcohol, being very sweaty, very strong perfume, or very strong aftershave. So when people go on a beekeeping course, we say don't wear perfume, don't wear aftershave, don't eat bananas just before don't eat bananas in the apiary, because they contain chemical analogues that may excite the interest of bees. So quite often when we've had beginners who say, oh, these bees are always stinging me, and they just smell like an advert for Chanel No. 5 or something. You say, well, you can't do that, and you've got to think of everything. You've got to think of whether it's your washing powder, your shampoo, your face cream, hand cream.
I was going to ask a question about the washing powder. I was going to ask what you would use. What do you use to for your bee suit?
Well, my bee suit, I usually do a mixture of Ecover unscented, sort of eco-friendly washing powder, because then it doesn't have any of the brightening enzymes or things like that, which the bees might take exception to. And the washing soda actually is quite good for getting propolis and other sort of bee-related muck out of your bee suit.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I use that. I use soda.
But I mean, for my own personal clothing, I have to say I tend to just use ordinary, ordinary washing powder. I don't have a set of beekeeping clothes that I only use unscented things. Maybe I should, but I don't.
No, I do the same. I keep beekeeping soda and washing separate to my normal washing. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, definitely, both of your statements reflect that it makes you more sensitive and you value that, I think. So that is a thing in itself. And in terms of the educational side of our program, definitely that heightened sensitivity in our cadets is something we're keen to find ways to develop that. And not to say that the bee sting should be a punishment for not being sensitive.
No.
But it is a balance. And I do like the way you read it, Beekeeper, Katy, in terms of realizing that maybe there's an error in movement or some harm done or something that's disturbed them that was not seen. It works a lot with what Professor Kritsky was talking about. He views the practice as a kind of Tai Chi. We're going to talk with him in more detail. So, yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
sure. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, finish, and then I'll.
Well, I was just going to say that bees do not like vibration and hard knocks and this, that, and the other. So when you're taking the roof off the hive and this, that, and the other, you have to just move slowly and carefully, but not so slowly that you're letting all the heat out of the hive and causing the bees problems. So you just have to be, just move calmly and slowly and not make any abrupt movements and things like that. I mean, I wear gloves for beekeeping because I want to be able to rinse my gloves off between colonies so there's no disease transmission. And also it stops the bees running up the cuffs of your bee suit, rather than because I don't want to have bees on my hands. I mean, I know people who don't wear any sort of gloves, and then they sort of wash their hands between each colony. But then if you're out in the middle of a field and all you've got is a bucket of sort of cold soapy water, that's not great. So I tend to, and you need to wash your hive tool anyhow between colonies to prevent disease transmission. So I just wear the gloves. But you can't have big, thick leather gloves because you haven't got the sensation of what you're touching, and that's when things can go wrong. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess that leaves me thinking then when I go into my colony and the bees do get a little bit defensive. Okay, let me backtrack. I like smoothies, and in my smoothies is bananas. So let's say I've had a smoothie on a Saturday morning, and the Sunday I go in and do my check, would that still be lingering?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Okay.
I think if you stood in front of the hive and ate a banana, you might get into trouble. Don't, I've done this, not deliberately.
Yeah.
I was actually sitting in a car with the window open in an area where there were loads of hives, and there'd been a downpour of rain. So I was sitting in the car because it had been raining and I didn't want to be standing out in the rain, and it was lunchtime, and I thought, I'll just have a banana. But I had the window open, stopped to see the car steaming up, and a bee just flew in, stung me on the cheek, and flew out again. I was like, yeah, thanks, mate. Anyhow, this is really putting our listeners off keeping bees, I think. So, I think we've covered the defensive angle, unless there are any more questions.
No, that's clear for me, and it's an important issue regarding this. Obviously, this program is part of a series around our project, which is for Science Week, but also the beginning of our organisation, Keeping Bees. So we're entering the practice, and it's important to highlight the things that need risk assessments and special measures and special training so that everyone is aware of that. And yeah, it's good.
Okay, so I think the last job we discussed was defending the hive. So the next job that the workers progress on to is actually going out to forage. And they can forage for pollen, which is a powdery substance on the stamens of plants, which they then bring back to feed to the larvae. And they can forage for nectar, which is the sugary substance within plants, which is really what draws pollinating insects to plants, because the plants want the insects to walk over their flowers and distribute the pollen around. and the bees and other insects are going in to get the nectar. Now, there is a very big difference between the length of a honeybee's tongue and the length of a bumblebee's tongue and the length of a butterfly's tongue. So different plants can have different levels of attraction for the different insects. So generally speaking, honeybees have got rather shorter tongues than bumblebees, and butterflies have got much longer tongues than either. But also, even within a species like lavender, there are different varieties where the nectar might be shallower than others. So some people will say, oh, I've got loads of honeybees on my lavender, and I think you should plant lavender. And other people will be looking at their slightly different variety of lavender, and it'll be covered in bumblebees, but no honeybees. So there are differences in the attractiveness of the forage. And the final job that the worker bees do is collecting water. And it's the oldest bees who will go out and do this. Now, as part of foraging, the bees literally wear themselves out. Their wings get ragged. They only live about 6 weeks in the summer because they work so hard. And the final job is collecting water because, unfortunately, bees do not swim very well. So it's the most dangerous task. So if you're setting up an apiary, they often recommend that you have a shallow dish of water with sort of gravel in or something so that the bees can settle on that and they don't drown themselves.
Would you have that shallow water close to the hive?
You could have it, within a couple of meters, because the other problem is if you've got an urban environment and the people next door have got a pond, the next thing you know, all your bees are going to be hopping over the fence to get their water, you see, and your neighbours will be going, why are your bees drinking my pond? So if you give them a shallow dish with gravel in, I mean, you've got to keep the water fresh as well. Not that I'm saying bees wouldn't drink out of a puddle, but it's nicer to have it fresher water for them.
Yeah.
On the business of bees drinking, I saw a very curious video. It was the documentary was about the honey badger and some researchers researching the honey badger, and in the process of them doing that, they had some points where they were basically tracking them, and some points where they would be relaxing, and they said that they would use wet towels to cool themselves off because it's very hot where they were. And they had a scene where they put the wet towel on and then swarms of bees would come to drink the water through the towel. So they had a very curious visual of a person reading a book with a wrapped towel with just loads of bees on the towel.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I mean, I suppose if water is very short, then, there isn't any in the environment that they can access, and yes, they will do that. And the other thing about very, very hot temperatures, certainly in the UK, is it will dry up the nectar. So when it was very hot last summer, it causes a reduction in the amount of nectar, and it's possible for bees to starve in the height of summer. People see the flowers all around and think, oh, well, there's loads of flowers, but the nectar actually close up because it's so hot, the nectar evaporates too quickly and the plants don't have the energy to replenish it. So there can be a dearth of nectar in very high temperatures, and also that means that there's less liquid as well, because the bees also get some liquid as they're evaporating off the nectar to make honey. The bees also can benefit from that water that they're evaporating off. So the next thing I'm going to explore is, why do worker bees work? Because I've already said they only have quite a short life. They spend all their time cleaning up, looking after other people's kids, and generally doing all the work. So bee genetics are quite unusual.
Well, when you say other people's kids, I know you're saying it in a pun type of way, but the whole mind of the colony is a very interesting thing if we can put the idea of mind to the colony, and
absolutely
how each member is is harmonized, is in harmony with the collective. It's it's something I would really like to hear more about. And
this is what I'm just going to briefly touch on now.
Okay.
Because there's a sort of, I think the trait you're describing is often, in genetic terms, called altruism. So one or some members of a group or colony will sort of sacrifice their well-being and passing on their specific genes to benefit the entire community who are genetically similar. So you may find that, you know, in a herd of antelope or something, the one on the periphery that gives the alarm to say, oh, there's a stalking lion in the area, that's the one that is, because it's making the noise to alert the rest of the herd, that's the one that the lion might target, but then the rest of the herd gets away carrying their closely related genetics with them. So there's the idea of altruism, and with the sort of genetics in a bee colony, the queen has a full complement of chromosomes, and when she lays an egg, she makes the active decision whether she's going to lay a fertilized female worker egg, because she carries the male sperm within her abdomen that she's sort of stored up from when she went on the mating flight, or she can withhold the sperm and she can lay a male drone who only has half the complement of chromosomes. So the female worker carries both male and female chromosomes from the males that the queen was mated with, but the drones are almost like a sort of male clone of the queen. They don't have any other genetic material within them from another male. They are just a copy of what the queen has as her genetic material. And when this is sort of looked at, it means that the sisters, all the workers that the queen lays, are actually genetically closer to each other than they would be to their own offspring. So when the worker bee is caring for the larvae, she is caring for something which is genetically more similar to her than her own offspring would be. So from the genetics point of view, it makes perfect sense for her to sacrifice her own reproductive cycle to care for this very, very closely related other. And that's something which I'm going to explore in a far greater depth in another podcast, but I think that might be what you are touching on.
I mean, it's. I think this is where I think storytelling may be helpful to try and take on the mind, and even the kind of language that would have to come into that way of living and being. I think it's different from the way humans are. So it's interesting to me how that might be conveyed, the language of the colony.
Yeah.
I mean, altruism, I don't know if that's the word. Definitely that word didn't come to my mind. But I wonder what words, if there were words that bees could convey, which I guess they are conveying words in a certain way, what would it be? Which words would be the most, which ones would they adopt to describe their way of being?
I don't know. I mean, to me, altruism is the sort of the sacrifice of oneself for the well-being of a greater number of others. Or not necessarily a total sacrifice as in death, but certainly giving of oneself to support others. So that, and it's used in genetics as a sort of trying to explain why you get creatures that will respond to a threat, alert the rest of the herd or group, and then possibly expose themselves to danger at the same time. But that's certainly the language that could be applied to that situation is something that can be explored in a future podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
So the next thing I'm going to explore is how the bees make sense of their world. So how do they see, how do they smell, and things like that. So the first thing I want to briefly say is that we have a single lens in our eye, and when we look at something, what happens is the light rays from the object we're looking at enter our eye, and when they pass through the lens of the eye, they actually cross over and they appear on the back of the eye, the retina, upside down. So our brains actually interpret that image and they sort of put it the right way up within our brains so that we're not falling over things that we're looking at the wrong way up. So there's a sort of a processing within our minds and how we see. Now, in the 1940s, somebody did some experiments where they gave people spectacles made of prisms. So that actually reversed the light before it entered the eye. And so people were effectively seeing the image the correct way up on their retina. And after a few days, their brains started to reinterpret it the other way up, so that their brains had to sort of remodel what they were seeing and flip it round so it was the correct way for people to orientate themselves as they moved around. And then, of course, once they took the spectacles off, they then had to wait another few days for their brains to reorientate and interpret the image, because the image had flipped yet again in respect to how the brain was interpreting images. And I think there was one person whose brain didn't like flipping all that much, and they were left with a considerable longer time seeing everything upside down, which was very inconvenient. I don't think we're allowed to have experiments like that anymore. But the difference with a bee's eye is that it's a compound eye. I'm talking about the larger eyes, because I think I touched on last time that they actually have three little light-sensing eyes on the tops of their heads, but we're talking about the two large compound eyes, one on either side of their heads. And so we don't actually know what the bee sees. We don't know whether it's like these toys you can get in sort of like the gift shop of the zoo, where it says, oh, look through this, and it'll be like an insect. You see lots of tiny little hexagonal images. We don't know whether they see lots of little images of the same thing, whether they see one big image. We've got absolutely no idea. But what we do know, because of experiments which were originally started by the German scientist Carl von Frieschen, right, starting about 1912, I think, is that bees see different colours to human beings. So bees do not see red, but they do see ultraviolet and polarized light, which human beings cannot see. So when a bee sees flowers, they see something very different to what a human being would see. And I've got some pictures here of a dandelion, which is yellow, but when the bee sees it, it's actually whatever color they perceive as red in the center with a fringe of white around it. So they won't see red in the way that we see red, but they'll see something that they will identify as a slightly different color. Then I've got a yellow and brown flower called the gazania, and they will see the center, which is a sort of a greeny brown. They'll see that as bright blue, which will presumably attract them to the nectar there. And a crocus that we see as purple, they will see that as yellow with a dark center. And a celandine, which we see as yellow, they will actually see as a sort of a red color, or how they perceive it. And grape hyacinths, muscari, we see those as blue, and they will see them as green instead. So what they see is very different to what we see. And if these flowers have got areas of ultraviolet on them, then the bees will spot those, and human beings will miss that.
Webinar 9, more detail mastery, on our level being webinar 9 mastery program, detail on level being 9 mastery program. Wow! Mastery program, level being 9 mastery.
So the next sense I want to discuss is what they use their antennae for. Now, bees do look after their antennae. They groom them very carefully. And one of the things that they use antennae for is for smell. So if they want to smell something, they'll dip their antennae into it. The other thing that they use their antennae for is when they're flying along, they actually use it to work out wind speed, because if you've got long hair like mine, when the wind blows, it blows back behind you, and that's entirely what the bees' antennae do. They respond to the wind speed as well. The other thing that I wanted to just briefly mention was that when the bees are out collecting, they have a specific sort of comb on the rear of their legs where they collect up the pollen, and they sort of comb it all through, and it's stored in the pollen basket on the backs of their legs. So I think that was something I meant to talk about under foraging for pollen, and somehow I've managed to get my slides in the wrong order, so I can apologise. Anyhow, moving on from this is how bees see and smell, I wanted to talk very briefly about how they communicate what they can see to other bees in the colony, and this is the waggle dance. So, the scientist I mentioned before, Carl von Frisch, did a lot of work. I mean, the waggle dance has been noticed in bee colonies for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, but nobody could ever quite figure out what it was all about. And it took this scientist probably about 50 years of close observation before he understood what was being communicated in the waggle dance. So I think that's an entire other podcast about the waggle dance, but very briefly, it's a way, and we have to remember that the bees are in the dark, so visual cues aren't very helpful. Everyone's buzzing around, so probably audio cues aren't very helpful, but the cue of movement and direction and speed and vibration all come into play. So when a bee finds a particularly good source of nectar, she'll go back to the hive and she will alert her sisters to the fact that she's found something, apparently by walking on top of them, which probably would get your attention. Mm-hmm. Then she will make a sort of a circular dance, and then she will run and waggle her abdomen, and the angle at which she is performing the waggling part in relation to up and down in the hive indicates the direction of the nectar source relative to the sun. So she's able to communicate to her sisters where this good source of nectar is. And while she's doing this, they will touch her with their antennae, and they'll get the scent of the forage that she's discovered, so they'll know where to sort of fly out and what they're looking for. So that sort of covers as much as I'm going to go into. The rest in depth we'll have to wait for another time. So the other things that I wanted to briefly discuss were the products of the hive. And one of the things you can do is collect the pollen on the bees' legs. And you can see this for sale in health food shops. So you can put a special pollen comb on the front of your hive. So the bees spend all this effort collecting pollen. And then when they come in through the hive, the gap is so small that the pollen actually gets brushed off their legs. And you can collect it and eat it if you want to. Now, the slight problem with this is that they're gathering the pollen to feed their own brood. So if you collect all the pollen for them, but you're going to starve your bees. So you can only do this for a very short time. Otherwise, you're going to actually starve your bees. And bees will generally be very organized in the way they store the pollen. So they will store the pollen of one type of plant all together in a cell in the comb. So you will look at a comb of pollen stores and you'll see there are all sorts of different colors. I've even seen one in one of my hives where they'd filled up half a cell with one color pollen, a reddish color, and then obviously whatever that source was ran out. And so they filled in the top half of the cell with a yellow colour, so you get this bi-coloured thing, sort of which looks amazing. I'll have to see if I can find a photo of that to put in.
I've seen this too.
Yeah. But each plant's got different coloured pollen, and if you're like me, I've got a book of all the different colours, so you can look and work out what your bees are foraging on. Have you got one of those, Abenah?
I don't.
No, they're not cheap, but they're very good. What I do is sometimes people will text me and say, "Oh, my bees are coming in this colour," and I just take a photo. Don't tell the book publishers. I take a photo of the page and send it to them, and they can work out what plants they're on.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you to name the book, but yeah. Yeah.
I can't actually. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's just like a Dulux colour chart, only under each colour. And
no problem.
Pollen in poppies is black. Pollen from blackberries is grey. Pollen from snowdrops is bright orange. You get green pollen, blue pollen. It's all very exciting. The other product that you can collect within your hive is something called bee bread. Now,
before you go on to the bee bread, regarding the pollen and the little tool that can extract it off them before they bring it into their space.
Yes.
Why wouldn't they then? Because I can see in the image you have, the deposits are on nearby. Why wouldn't they spend time trying to just recoup that and keep trying to get it back on their body and get back in again?
I think, I can only speculate here, but I think because it's sort of in, there are a couple of bees on it, so they might be attempting it. But I think they sort of, because it's such a sort of an alien thing to happen to them, they just haven't quite figured out what to do about it. I don't know. I always get the feeling, and I could be quite wrong, they just sort of think, and just go out and get some more. I know exactly what you mean. I'll have to look and see whether there's any sort of grid on top so it prevents them going in and retrieving it. Because I think what happens is that when you put the strip on the front and the pollen falls in, the bees might not have full access to it. So they might be prevented from just reclaiming all their hard work.
And so obviously the process of stripping it off their sacs doesn't damage the sac as such. It just brushes it off.
Exactly, because pollen is slightly sticky anyhow, and I think they might use a bit of sort of saliva to comb it all together into this lump that they can then carry on their legs, because they will use their mid-limbs to comb any pollen they've got coating their heads and other parts of their bodies, to then sort of bring it all together into the pollen basket. So I mean, you can, if you want to, you can sort of knock the pollen off the bee. Not something I've wanted to do myself, but you can do that. So it's not stuck on particularly strongly.
So it's not really a sac then, it's more of a... It's
more of a sort of a structural aggregate. It's not an actual sac. It's not. They're not sort of putting it in a receptacle. It's called a pollen basket, but it's more the way they have combed it and put it together rather than an actual container.
Okay, it's very interesting. I mean, there's two thoughts on that. One, I would think then that it must be mixed with some of their own sort of digestive enzymes or their own saliva.
I think there's a bit of saliva in there as well. But pollen is very sticky because it has to stick to the anther of the flower to pollinate it. So even wind-pollinated pollen is possibly going to have to stick somewhere. So there is an aspect of it that is a bit sticky.
The other question I have is a slightly different point, but are you aware of any situation where bees are kept and plants are kept in an enclosed space, a large enclosed space, so that the bees only have those plants to work with, a controlled space?
Yes. However, it's a very common practice in the UK, but it's not honeybees, it's bumblebees being kept in polytunnels with tomatoes, because the tomato flower is very specific and it needs to have a vibration to release the pollen and fertilize it so you get your tomatoes. So the alternative to having colonies of bumblebees living in your polytunnels, and you want to do that so you get an early crop of tomatoes, because in our society today we can't possibly wait for anything. The alternative to that is to have people walking along hand pollinating the tomatoes with a sort of like a vibrating magic wand thing. There's also a problem they've had in China where the natural bee population has been so depleted in industrial areas and in areas where there's been heavy pesticide use that people have to hand pollinate the fruit trees because there aren't enough pollinators to go around. So yes, certainly having bees in an enclosed environment to specifically pollinate crops is a thing.
I mean, I have
now honeybees, I'm not sure about. I'd have to do some research into whether anyone's tried that.
This is something, it's a thought experiment really, but I'm very curious about the honey produced by bees that only work with one specific plant and what that means.
They will do that. They will do that even if you just leave them out to the open. You get a crop called borage, which has lovely blue flowers, and borage seeds, the oil that's extracted from the seeds is used in medicine. And I think it might also be used for vaccines as well, so there's probably a very big incentive for farmers to grow borage. And the bees love the borage honey, so they will fly out to these fields of blue flowers and they will collect nothing but borage. And when you're a beekeeper, you can actually work out what the bees have been foraging on from the scent of the honey. And if it's a large field, they will forage, and your entire sort of hive of honey will be just forage. The other thing beekeepers will do is take their bees to specific flowering areas. Heather is very popular because heather honey has a very specific flavour, and in Greece you are able to get lots of different honeys. They do chestnut honey and hazel honey, lots and lots of monoculture honey. So it's not so much that they are necessarily done in an enclosed environment. If the bees find a very good source of nectar nearby, they're going to take part of least resistance and gather that.
Okay.
It also means that urban honey from city areas actually has the nicest and most complex flavour, because borage honey is very boring and bland, whereas honey from allotments and gardens has got lots of complex flavours because the bees are foraging on a variety of different crops and flowers.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
So I think the next thing I'm going to talk about was what they call bee bread, which is where the bees have mixed pollen with nectar to create this stuff called bee bread. And this is really what the stored pollen looks like. And there again, you can harvest this and you get these sort of little hexagonal lumps. But then, of course, there again, that's the food for the brood. So if you're taking that, then you are depriving the brood of its food. So the final thing that everybody's really excited about is nectar. Now, nectar, when it's collected, is fairly dilute. So what the bees do, they will come in with their honey stomachs full of nectar, and rather unromantically, they will regurgitate that, and their sisters who are engaged in nectar conversion, bees have got an enzyme in their stomachs called invertase, so they will invert sugars, which means they're less prone to fermentation and sort of bacterial contamination, and they will spread the nectar around so it's on a large surface area and the water will evaporate off. And when the water level is down to less than, say, about 20%, they will put a wax cap on that honey, and that prevents more water coming in. And then you consider the honey to be ripe when it's capped. So generally speaking, honey is about 30 to 40% fructose, about 30% glucose, and this will vary depending on the source of the honey. So borage honey will have a higher level of glucose, and other honeys will have a much lower level. And there'll be around 17% water, and then there's a few other things, maltose, trisaccharides, sucrose, and some minerals and vitamins and enzymes. But the principal components are fructose, glucose, and water. Now, if you have honey which has a higher water content than 20%, you can't actually call it honey. Honey specifically has to have a water content of less than 20%. And beekeepers have something called a refractometer, where you put a little splodge of honey on it, hold it up to the light, and you look at how the honey sample has bent the light path, and that is read off a scale, and you can work out the percentage of water in your sample of honey.
I have one of those. I have one of those.
Good. You're well ahead then.
Me too.
Yeah, I've got one.
So is that called baker's honey?
Yes. If it's too high, it's okay for use in cooking, but it has to be called baker's honey. You can't. You can try and evaporate. I mean, you can have a honey evaporation cabinet. So if you can get the level down, the other thing you can do is have a honey with a high water content and mix it with one that's got a very low water content. So I think the lowest one I've ever encountered is something like 14%. This is me personally. I'm sure there are others who've got lower. And so if you've got a high level water one, you can just mix them together so the total product has less than 20%. But the main problem with the high water content is fermentation. So you end up with the sugar reacting with yeast in the atmosphere and converting to alcohol. And then you have mead, not honey. I don't know if bees can get drunk, because I know some people who mix some syrup to feed their bees, and I don't know what they've done with it, but it had obviously started to ferment, because when they gave me the bees to look after for them, it's quite a complicated story. And when I sort of lifted the hive off and looked at them feeding it, the smell of alcohol was really strong, and I was like thinking, oh my goodness. So I don't know if bees can get drunk. They didn't look drunk, but how do you know if a bee's drunk, you know? So it is a problem, and that's why the bees will instinctively make sure that their stores aren't going to ferment. So we're now onto the queen bee. I think we've exhausted the workers, so we're now going to go on to the queen bee and the life cycle of the hive. So the queen has a longer body and longer legs, and she tends to run about on the comb. Some people describe her as having a almost more like a spider-like movement. And her job is to lay the eggs, and that is pretty much everything that she does. So the larvae, you start off with an egg that is sort of upright in the cell, and then as the egg matures, it sort of lies down in the bottom of the cell, and the exterior of the egg sort of dissolves into the skin of the larvae, so they don't hatch, so you don't get those thousands of tiny weeny little eggshells in the hive. They actually sort of absorb the exterior of the egg, and then the larvae is a tiny little sort of caterpillar-like creature, and the eggs are very small. And one of the biggest problems learner beekeepers have is spotting eggs, because they're just a couple of millimeters. But you do get an eye in, and you are able to spot them eventually. And the worst case scenario is that people can take a photo of the comb, and then when they get home they can sort of like blow it up and see if there are eggs present. If you use a magnifying glass to look in the comb on a sunny day, you're going to focus the light's rays and fry your eggs, which isn't great. So don't recommend use of a hand lens, but you can get some good glasses from Poundland, which are almost good enough to just see if you've got eggs there. So as the larvae develop and they fill up the cell, once they get to the stage they're no longer fed, the cell is covered up, and they go through a sort of a pupation stage where they change into, from a sort of a curled round grub-like creature, they change into a six-leg winged adult. And the emerging bees are very fluffy and cute, and they sort of have to dry off. Go on.
Katy, can I just backtrack a little? Just on the larvae, I've noticed that they normally, the queen normally lays from the middle and then works her way outwards, like in a type of oval shape.
That's right. Yes, I think I've got a picture of that further on, but yes.
Okay, no, I just wanted to...
No, I mean,
that's always the case.
Usually, yes. If the queen's running out of space, she'll bung an egg anywhere that she can get the room, because she's got these thousands of eggs that she wants to lay. So usually a good brood pattern is where you get a sort of area of eggs and then young larvae and older larvae and then mature brood. And of course the mature brood will emerge into adult bees, clean out the cells, and then the queen will start laying in there. So it's a constant sort of cycle of using the comb. So when you look at the comb, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then when she runs out of space in there, then you would just add another brood box.
You can add another brood box. You can split the colony, or the colony, if she runs out of space, the colony may think about swarming, which is what I'm going to be talking about in a moment. So if you look at a honeycomb, the ordinary workers have sort of got like a flat, sort of biscuity lid on their cells. Now the drones are much bigger, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, and so they have a domed cap, so you can actually see whether you've got worker brood or drone brood. And the queen cells are much longer, and they stick out, and they just look like someone's got a shelled peanut, really, and put that on the comb. So for the worker bee, she is 3 days an egg, and then she's a larva from pretty much day 4 to day 8. Then a cell is capped, and between sort of days 9 and 20, she's changing into an adult bee. The drones actually have a longer stage. Everything's an egg for 3 days, and then the young larva emerges. But the queen, interestingly enough, has got the shortest life cycle. So she has a larva that's fed exclusively on royal jelly, and they will start to cap the queen cell by day 8, and then she's only got another 8 days before she emerges as a queen. And this is the reason why beekeepers tend to check their colonies every 7 to 10 days, because you don't want to miss the queen emerging, otherwise you're going to lose half your workforce, and possibly your neighbours are going to get a most unexpected colony of bees in their roof. Now, if the queen hormone levels reduce, she's not going to be producing the queen signal, and this means that the workers' ovaries, even though they are unmated, the workers can actually start to lay eggs themselves. But it's usually they're not that great at it. Sometimes workers will sort of sneak out an egg every now and then, and other bees can detect from the scent of it that it doesn't belong to the queen, and they will what they call hygienically remove. They'll just eat that egg that shouldn't be there. But if the queen is not producing enough hormone, and that the workers will start laying, and they'll lay multiple eggs in cells instead of just one per cell, and these will all turn into drones. The other thing I wanted to say is that the honeycomb is at about 21 degrees angle, And this is why the honey doesn't fall out, because it's at this angle, sort of tipping in, so that when they put the very liquid nectar in, that's why it doesn't all just fall out. You can shake it out, but it doesn't sort of fall out naturally. And then I've got a picture here of the brood pattern, which shows exactly what Abenah was talking about. So it's almost like a sort of a bee rainbow. You've got the capped worker brood in the middle, you've got the larvae surrounding that of various ages, and then you've got some stores in the corners, and you've got this semicircular pattern. Now, to have enough space for the laying queen is crucial. So if you've got everything bunged up and no space, and Abenah and I know who this colony belongs to, this is a colony where I was helping our mutual friend, and they were just, I think if we'd been like 10 minutes later, they would have swarmed. So the bees, there's just an uncountable number. I mean, a big colony's got about 50,000 bees in it, and I think this was a very big colony. So, you want to try to avoid bees swarming, partly because of the inconvenience to others, and partly because you don't want to lose your workforce, and also because wild swarms have actually got a very poor survival in the wild. They have to find somewhere to live, and they reckon only about a third of swarms actually survive. So you want to avoid sort of sending these creatures out into a fairly uncertain odds for survival. So it's far better that you do good swarm control, and you're able to, if you don't need loads of bees yourself, you can always pass them on to other people who want to keep bees, or give them to people who have got a very large beekeeping concern and keep them all in a field or something. So what the bees do, first of all, when they think about swarming, they build a little wax thing called a queen cup. So it's just like a little cup. And as soon as you see those in spring, and I'm going to be starting looking for them soon, you know they're thinking about swarming. And then if they start polishing the cup and start putting royal jelly in the bottom, they're definitely thinking about swarming. And then if there's an egg in there, then that is also a very clear sign that the whole swarming switch has been switched on. And once they've decided they're going to swarm, there is really very little you can do about it. You can try just cutting all those cells out, and they will create new ones. And if you keep cutting them out, they'll start putting them in places where you won't find them. Or they'll know obviously they know that you're there going through the hive. They'll sit on them. They'll sit on them and hide them from you. You have to shake the bees off. So the best thing to do is as soon as you see that you think they're going to swarm, you can do what they call a preemptive split, where you just divide the colony in half, so the queen's in one half and there's no queen in the other half, but you must make sure there's newly laid eggs in both, and in the half where there's no queen, they will raise a queen for that colony. And there are various other things you can do. Depending on how sort of swarmy your bees are, you don't necessarily have to destroy all the queen cells. What you can do is cut them out. This is something my friends and I have done. Cut them out very carefully and keep them in the airing cupboard. And then and you put a bit of fondant in there, so when they emerge, if you know friends who've got trouble with their colonies, or you need to requeen a colony, you can give them a queen bee. Now, there are obviously far more professional ways of doing this than stuffing them in your mate's airing cupboard, and you've got to warn the rest of the family, otherwise they might get freaked when they go and get a clean towel out and discover the airing cupboard's full of bees. But you obviously keep them in a container, like a takeaway container with an air hole. You don't just leave them wandering around. Yeah. So there are things you can do. Some of them you can see they just don't look right, so you would cull those. They obviously haven't developed properly. So it's a balance really with all these things.
So with swarming, then one of the ways to prevent swarming would be to make sure that the queen and they have enough room. So
absolutely,
another brood box on top would assist that, because it's like
definitely
having more children and you need to move to a bigger house. Rather than
exactly
have a bigger house, you build an extension upwards or something like that.
Yes,
kind of
that's
thing.
right. You can add extra space for them. But you see, quite often, once they've decided they're going to swarm, even if you give them the extra space, you kind of needed to have given them the extra space before they decided to swarm. So that's another reason for keeping an eye on the colonies and monitoring what's going on.
Level being 9. More detail mastery. On our level being level 9. Mastery program. More detail on level being 9. Mastery program. Wow. Mastery program. Mastery program. Level being 9. Mastery.
So if your bees swarm, I've got a nice photo of a beekeeper in Norfolk who was going to go and check his colonies of bees, and as he was driving to the apiary, there was this massive swarm flying out in front of him. So he was too late, unfortunately. And what these bees will have done is they'll probably fly out and they'll settle near the hive, and they'll send out scout bees. They'll either have made the decision that there's a specific place they want to swarm to, or they will swarm out and then start looking for a home. Usually it's the former. They will have a reasonably clear idea where they're going to go, and they're looking for something akin to a hollow tree, and they're looking for something about the volume. I think it's about the same volume as a national brood box, so I think it's something like about a metre cubed. I'll have to check that. So that's the sort of space they're looking for, which unfortunately can be inside someone's soffit, inside someone's roof, inside a chimney, and bees will plonk themselves in ridiculous places, like in a discarded tyre, in someone's compost bin, or something like that. So when the bees are gathering together, they're going to use the product from the nasal gland, and they literally stick their sort of bums up in the air so that the pheromone is distributed and other bees can detect it. And if you want to attract swarms, you can actually buy this honeybee attractant, which is based on the pheromone, and what they hope you can do is you can put some of this attractant in a beehive, and then if there's a passing swarm, they'll detect it, and or if the scout bees are coming out, they'll detect it and they'll move in. You can also do the same with lemongrass and things like that, which also are supposed to attract swarms. However, swarming in an urban environment can be very inconvenient, because when we have bees on the allotment and a swarm of bees settled on one of our friend's coats. So she hung her coat up on a post while she was digging, and when she went to go and put her coat on, it was all covered in bees. So unfortunately, her door keys and her phone were in her coat, so she was stranded on the allotment with no coat, no phone, and no door keys or way of getting home. Luckily, bees were just they'd obviously decided that the post was where they were going to gather, and then they were going to move on to their final destination. So she was only sort of held up for like about 20 minutes while they got themselves orientated and flew away. But if they'd stayed for very much longer, I think she'd have been quite sad. If bees swarm in central London onto a shop or something like that, it can be very costly to business, because obviously any business is going to be concerned that if a customer has sensitivity to a bee sting, and there's sort of bees on their shop and someone gets stung, they're going to get worried about being sued. So the usual reaction is to shut the shop. So that can be many thousands of pounds of income reduced. And it doesn't really matter whether they do it on a big posh London shop or just your local deli. It's still very inconvenient for the the business owner. Now,
yes, I was going to say that I saw a swarm happen near where I worked a year ago. and so not last year, the year before, 2019, and it was a corner pub, and the bees had actually landed on a post. It was like an old fence post at the front of the border of the pub, and so because I was walking past and I was wondering what everybody was doing, and I realised what had happened. So I walked into the pub and I said to them, I know somebody that can pick this up, and I called one of my colleagues. So
I thought you were going to say you just went in and said, do you want those bees? I'll have them. And just went running home and got your bees them.
No, I didn't. I thought about it and I thought, no, I'm not ready for that yet. So I just called one of my other colleagues who's looking to have a lot more hives, and he came out with his bee suit and he'd done his thing, and everybody was asking questions. It was quite fascinating, actually.
Oh yes, I mean it's quite a spectacle when if you get if you collect a swarm and you can educate the public at the same time.
Yeah. So I haven't done one myself. I think when I'm little, I will do. I reckon I will end up doing one day. Someone's going to call and it's going to be local to me, and I'll be like, okay, I'm ready now, and then I'll go and. If I have space, that is, I will go and do the job.
I mean, a swarm of bees is generally when they are at their least hazardous, because they're with the queen, they don't have any honey or any territory, a hive to defend, so they're all just happy, really. I mean, where we've had swarms on the allotments which weren't from our bees, they were from a local beekeeper who unfortunately... they lost their bees in swarms. I mean, we don't know who the person was, because obviously the swarm of bees didn't come identified. But we literally just used to pluck them off this. They used to land on this tree, and we just used to pluck them off the tree. It was just like a big fuzzy bunch of grapes. Just used to pick them off the tree and put them in a box.
Yeah.
Not even, we did, I mean, when my friend Linda first started this, she didn't have a bee suit, she didn't have anything. Just pick them all, she hadn't even been on a beekeeping course. She just thought, they look lovely, I'll have them. And she just gathered them all up and put them in a box.
It's funny, I actually have seen a video of a female gathering the bees with her hand and just brushing them and sweeping them in. I'm like, wow.
I mean, if you're careful, you can do it. I think a lot of it is, A, don't have heavily scented hand cream, and B, you have to have a degree of confidence to do that. Sometimes I think if people have if they have gloves, it actually gives them enough confidence to sort of do things which they'd be more scared of. Because, I mean, to be brutally honest, those vinyl gloves, the bees can easily sting you through them. They're more for hygiene than anything else, but I think it just gives you that little bit of confidence, because if you're nervous and you're not careful with them, then they're going to spot that, particularly if you're accidentally sort of squishing them. So when the bees have swarmed, if they're going to have a colony outside, it's easier to spot what they're doing. But regardless of whether they're in a hollow tree or whether they're outside, what they do once they've got their final destination is they settle down to build comb, and they sort of do something called festooning, which is like they make themselves almost into a row of bunting. They all hang on to one leg with another bee's other leg, and they just string themselves out, and they start to secrete wax from glands under their abdomen. And they produce these little squares of wax, and they can chew them all together and mould them into a comb. So if the comb is outside, I mean, there are some varieties of bees, I think it's Apis mellifera florea and Apis mellifera dorsata. They live in very hot countries, and they just have this semicircle of comb, either hanging off a tree or off a cliff face, and it doesn't rain very much, and they're probably in a forest, so they're protected, and there's foliage all the year round, and that's okay. In the UK, not so great. So a wild hive out in the open isn't going to do spectacularly well. But if they can find a space in a tree, then that's great. So this is what's happened when your swarm has been released. However, of course, back in the hive, the original hive, there should be a young queen who's going to emerge, and she will be looking after the colony, the half that remains. So the virgin queen, when she emerges, she probably will make that quacking, tooting noise that I played you earlier. And so the workers know that she's there and that she's okay. And she will walk around and just get used to the hive, and then she's going to go out on her mating flight. Now, the drones, which I've mentioned before, they are fed, and the queen is fed by a worker through a process called trophallaxis, where basically the worker bee regurgitates the honey from their honey stomach and feeds it to another bee, and they just sort of snog it to each other. So when the drones have been fed, presumably they're given their breakfast, and they fly out to something called a drone congregation area. And this is something that's quite high up, and it might be something like a flagpole. It doesn't have to be anywhere very large. And the drones will hang around, and they'll keep an eye out for a queen who is flying past on her mating flight. So I've got a video of the mating flight, and this was taken by a woman who, she must have actually had a drone. So we've got two beekeepers, I think they're in Sweden, and they spot the mating flight, and you just get this group of bees flying along, and the drones are all chasing after the queen. So they've got these big eyes and strong wing muscles, and they're chasing after the queen. And what they most want to do is mate with her, because that's all they are interested in, really. So the drone will mate with the queen, and it's quite a quick process. And it's amazing that they can keep on flying along, actually. And once he has mated with her, he will then stop, and another drone, so she will mate with about 20 or 30 drones. But as soon as the drone has mated with the queen, he dies. So that's it. And so she then flies back to the hive, and given another day or so, will start laying eggs, fertilized eggs. Now, the way that the queen keeps the eggs, keeps the sperm viable for several years has been studied quite intensively, because, of course, people are very interested in artificial insemination of both human beings and animals, because generally sperm has got quite a short lifespan. But in the honeybee, what they do, they sort of curl round into a circle so they don't get tangled up and damaged, and they will stay within the queen's abdomen in the spermatheca for several years, and they will be completely effective, and she'll keep laying fertile eggs until she runs out of sperm.
Wow. So
I know.
So on the after you said that the drones are chasing the queen to mate with her, the other drones, they then return to the hive.
Yes, I think if they're unsuccessful, yes, they just go back and hope they sort of hang out at the congregation point and see if they can be lucky another time.
Right, because I was thinking to myself, with drones, they're just there, and they don't do anything in the hive. They're just there.
They are, yes. But I suppose.
Yeah, they don't do any work. They don't do anything. So they're taking up room in the hive, and I've observed that they're normally at the very perimeter of the hive, maybe on the last frame.
I suppose to an extent they could contribute to keeping the hive warm, just by sort of being there. But that's why at the end of the season, when the bees are unlikely to swarm, the workers will just stop feeding the drones. They'll starve them, and they'll just boot them out of the hive. And you may find, if you've got one of these wire queen excluders between your brood and your supers that stop the queen going up and laying eggs amongst the honey, that you'll find a lot of drones with their heads stuck in, because they're trying to get at the honey and they are too fat to fit through the queen excluder, and the workers they won't do anything, they'll just leave them. But there again, because they are effectively clones of the queen, they are very important for passing on, different genetic material, because one of the reasons that creatures are successful is if they can adapt to different circumstances, climate, regions, and food sources. So you want genetic diversity. If things get too specialised, you then end up that if there's a slight change in the environment, the organism can't adapt. But if there is a genetic diversity, then they're able to respond to that. So having the drones and having multiple mating is all quite useful. And that's pretty much the end of the enormously long podcast.
We've done a marathon tour of the introduction to
I
beekeeping.
think you have to chop this up into episodes. Everyone's going to be comatose by the end of it.
I think
I just had a couple questions that I didn't get to ask. I'm just going to ask them quickly before we really end off. Are there any birds that could be that are problematic to hives or bees?
Yes, woodpeckers. In the UK, woodpeckers normally, particularly the green woodpecker, they live on ants. So if the ground is frozen and they can't get to ants, they will have a look around to see what else they can eat. So if you very thoughtfully provided them with a wooden box that they can knock a hole through and eat the contents of, then that's what they'll do. But the interesting thing is, generally, they have to learn from another woodpecker that they can get into a hive. So if the woodpeckers in your area haven't figured out that they can knock a hole in your hive, then you're probably okay. If one of them learns, the others will observe that behaviour. And what you can do is sort of like put a cage of chicken wire over the hive so that the birds can't get close enough to knock a hole in it, or you can tape like a strip of black plastic bin liner that flaps in the breeze, because they don't like that. In Europe, there's the honey buzzard, which will also, wild colonies that are out in the open, they will break apart beehives as well to get at the honey and the larvae. And I think if a hive is exposed for some reason, so for example it's in a hollow tree and the tree blows down, other creatures will come and scavenge. Because the larvae are a good source of protein, so and obviously the honey is sweet, so that's very attractive.
Okay, and what about parakeets?
I don't know about parakeets because they can't really, they haven't got the right sort of beaks to hammer into the hive. I'm unaware of parakeets being a problem. Now, there's a huge colony on the allotment, so if you're working on my allotment at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you get a flock of 30 or 50 now parakeets flying over.
Well, the reason I ask is because I've recently had a colony that has come over probably in the last 2 months into the area, and they're like hanging out in the tree down at the bottom of the garden.
Yeah.
I've
got I hope not, because I've got a client. I keep the bees in their garden, and they get parakeets. They haven't reported. They didn't report last year that there are any problems with parakeets, but I'll certainly look into it and see. They're mostly seed eaters, aren't they? Because they've got these sort of beaks that sort of the top half of the beak sort of curls around, so it's really more for breaking into seeds and things like that. So I don't know whether they'd be very successful. But they certainly play havoc with your bird feeders, and they eat all my clients' pears before the pears ever get to ripen. And things like that. But I don't know. I don't know if they go after bees. I mean, there's another bird called the bee eater, and I'm pretty sure that also eats bees, but they are relatively uncommon. I'm just trying to think now whether they are. You get very many of them in the UK. I'm going to very quickly Google this just to find out, as you specifically asked about bees. Right. Let's see. Southern Europe, Australia, and New Guinea. The European bee eater. Let's see. So there have been some attempts to nest in Britain on about 5 occasions, 1920, 1955. If you see one, it's very unusual. So don't worry about the bee eaters. They look like beautiful. They look like a cross between a woodpecker and a kingfisher. So they've sort of got red heads, lovely bright blue breasts, and sort of a greeny blue tail and a white throat. So if you spot one of those in your tree, watch out for the bees.
Okay. Okay. And the other question I had was, do you mark your queen? Your queen?
Well, when I first started, we had to go at marking the queen, and that usually meant you get these special queen marking pens. Yeah. That usually meant that we accidentally got paint all over ourselves, and then the queen would we were a bit too scared to pick her up in case we injured her. So you then end up with a queen with a big stripe of paint, and sometimes if you get too much paint on the queen, you can end up, the workers will reject her because she smells of paint and not of queen bee. Yeah. So you do have to be careful when you're doing it. You can catch the queen in something called a crown of thorns queen cage, or pick her up and put her in a plunger cage and mark her far more successfully. I mean, it's useful to mark your queen, partly because it makes her easier to see, and also it means if there's a supersedure, so the bees have replaced her, you know that it's not the original queen, and if they've swarmed and they've replaced, then it's not the original queen. And it means you can keep tabs on how old the queen is. So yes, and I have marked my queens, and sometimes the paint just wears off them, and you know, if it does, I'm not awfully good at remarking them. I mean, some people do, but you know, yes.
Yeah,
do you mark yours?
Well, they were marked for me. So, and the green marking, which relates to the specific years that they emerged, is still there. So, but it appears like the other colony, the bees are trying to remove it from her.
Yes, I find it wears off. So it just they either try and remove it actively, or it wears off. Yes, I mean it is quite good practice because it means you can monitor the age of the queen and things like that. One of the problems though with people who clip and mark their queens is you want to be really sure that the queen has been on her mating flight before you clip her wings, because if she hasn't been on her mating flight and she can't fly, you've rather interrupted the whole life cycle thing, and you know, it's not going to go well because she can't fly.
Okay. I can't think of anything other than that. That was it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That's like you've made me all excited for spring again now.
Good. Oh wow, this is it.
But just boosted me again.
Well, good. I'm glad I haven't put you off. That would be awful. Just imagine.
No. I don't think anything would put me off. Doesn't matter what anyone says. Things, nothing. It wouldn't put me off. You know.
No.
I'm already active beekeeper. I'm loving it.
Good. I mean, so am I, and I'm starting to try and branch out now and see if I can find sites where you can plant small, you know, wildflower meadows. I'm saying small because you start them off small, and then if they work out okay, you can always expand them to provide forage for all pollinators, not just bees. Yeah. And you know, there's lots that can be done sort of in the community with encouraging people to have an interest in nature, and honeybees is a great way to do it because people understand, know that honeybees are valuable, that they pollinate, that they produce honey, and then that's sort of like a gateway into the whole sort of ecosystem and protecting pollinators and, ensuring that we've got, good food sources that are being pollinated by healthy insects that haven't been clobbered with pesticide pollution and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Funny, I was thinking about that the other day, and I had it in my head. I think somebody had sent me something, and it had seeds in it, and it said, "Oh, please plant me." And I thought, "Oh, that would be a good idea to send out, or maybe in my area, just post, some seeds, that wildflower seeds, and just a little description of what these seeds are for and how it can help." And,
absolutely. I mean, I've got some information which was produced by the London Beekeeping Association, which I'm an associate member of, and they've got even how you can have a window box that has pollen and nectar throughout the year for pollinators. So it sort of starts off, you've got some, it's got bulbs, and then it's got other things, and it just continually flowers throughout the year. So even if you've got no space, you've only got a window box, you can still make a difference. So I might pass that link on if Abenah is interested.
That would be great.
That'd be fine.
Yeah.
That'd be fine. And
it would be lovely just to have, something all year round.
Yes.
For them to pollinate.
Absolutely. I mean, I do try and do that. I've got a tiny garden that faces north, but I do try and have flowers all the year round. So at this time of year, I've got things like snowdrops, mahonia, the mahonia shrub. That's quite good for this time of year. Forsythia, winter jasmine, hellebores. They don't seem to find daffodils very useful, but one thing they do love is pulmonaria, which is going to be coming out soon as well. And so there's I've got quite a good list of plants, and if you're at all able to, if you can get any of them to grow, then that's a good way to do it. And also my lawn, which, let's be honest, is moss, really. I'm going to try and turn that into a wildflower area as well. So I've got some nigella that the bees and other pollinators love in a mist. They seem to quite like that, particularly the solitary bees. And so I've got that's come up in my lawn, and I'm just going to leave it. And, I'll see how that goes.
Okay, great. That's good to know. I will start planting some extra plants. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Katy. It's been, I wish we could continue. Another day.
Well, yeah, it's a huge topic. That's the wonderful thing about beekeeping, is if you're interested in it, it brings in this vast array of other things. You've got the whole sort of ecology, food production, and just sort of actual honey production and other hive products, the genetics, the scientific study of bee communication, microscopy, if you want to look at the anatomy, the evolutionary aspects, the cultural aspects of bees and honey throughout the sort of ages of humanity, other creatures. I mean, I know Abenah is probably desperate for me to shut up, but one thing a creature that I find really interesting is the honey guide, which is a bird which likes honey. And what it will do is it will find a primate, so a chimpanzee or a human being, and it will guide them to the hive and hope that they're going to break the hive open. And then when the primate has got the stings and taken the honey, they will be the honey guide will be able to feed on the rest. And I find that sort of interaction completely fascinating, that a creature has evolved to know that it can, it can get what it wants, but it can get someone else to do the different, if you've got hands and opposable thumbs, jolly easier than if you've got wings. So, I find that extremely interesting.
Well,
I think that's a podcast for another year, isn't it?
I think that the whole business of creatures relating to bees, other creatures relating to bees, that's a thing in itself. I would love to do that show as well. So we'll schedule that, but I think it is a different time. Probably not another. I don't think we have to go a year for that, but it's a different time. It's been a real pleasure hearing the two of you just absorbed in the world of beekeeping. That last 10, 15 minutes has been wonderful to hear the inner workings. But thank you both for sharing that. The insights are really, really special. And I trust that, people listening who may be very far away from the idea of keeping bees have enjoyed getting into the world. And definitely we will open it up through our practice. You mentioned some things, Katy, regarding the wildflowers and traveling to support this. We may have some projects that are suitable for that in Liverpool. So if you're open to traveling like that, then just yesterday...
That sounds very exciting.
It is. Yesterday I was speaking to an engagement officer for a community centre in the Sefton area, and basically the spaces there that we are due to be working in, managing, and they have facility around them, land facility. So I think that the main purpose for the building is not beekeeping, but there is space to do it. And we got talking about that, talking about planting around those areas and how that can work. So there's a lot of good potential. I think we're really keen to expand this. Once we've done this Science Week, we'll end up with a very comprehensive and diverse set of introductions to beekeeping from different perspectives, different levels of insight. And it should be a good platform for moving around the country with it.
Sounds amazing. I suppose one thing that occurred to me while you were talking about people engaging in beekeeping is there are 270 varieties of bees in the UK, and honeybees are just one of them. So there's loads of solitary bees that you can also introduce forage for, and you can get the pleasure of seeing bees in your garden, and you don't have to worry about honey extraction or stinging or anything else. So you can get plants in for those bees, and you can also put up these bee hotels. These have varying levels of success, but I gave one to my older sister, and she's now got a garden full of solitary bees. Even though they're called solitary and they don't live together in a community in the way honeybees and bumblebees do, if the resources are there for them, you will get a sort of a gathering of solitary bees, almost like instead of a bee hive, you'll almost have like a little bee village, so they're a bit more spaced apart. And, she's derived enormous amount of pleasure from having these solitary bees in her garden. So it isn't, even if you don't have much space or you're not interested in keeping bees per se, there's a lot you can do to attract bees and other insects into your garden and enjoy them.
Well, complementing that, as you know, we're based in a community centre, based in a park, Chestnut Community Centre in Tottenham, and we're very close with the Friends of the Park. Big up to them. I was in their AGM just 2 months ago, and we discussed this. We mentioned our plans. They were very excited by the idea, and the whole business of flower meadows. They're obviously very keen on that. They've set some things up for this, and they were very enthused at bringing pollinating insects into the space in the way that we will. So we've got some good things to showcase. I'm keen to showcase these things and make them into good educative experiences. Okay.
Well, I have to say, apart from the fact it's almost impossible to get me to shut up, I've thoroughly enjoyed giving the podcast and being able to speak with Abenah and with you and tomorrow, and to hear all these amazing things that you're doing, because sort of trying to bring communities together and improve everything for the community, whether it's sort of having external interests or caring for the ecology and things like that of an area. I think it's vitally important, because I think C19 has really rather brought home to people the importance of their local area and what can be done to make it productive or beautiful or just more pleasurable to walk around. So, I think you're doing some amazing work, and it's going to be of great benefit to everyone.
Well, thank you. Likewise. Thank you. Okay, I think we have come to that point. We've done a bit of a marathon on this one, but the first episode of the introduction was the teaser, and we got through the real groundwork. We've covered a lot of areas, given a very comprehensive introduction to beekeeping. Obviously, there's nothing quite like the hands-on experience, which both of you are demonstrating that. And our project will open a way for people to get a more hands-on experience, or at least a step closer towards that if they need that. But for our cadets, we appreciate your sharing, and we look forward to the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you spot any drones? I think these are just workers.
Level being 9, more detail mastery. On our level being level 9, mastery program. Detail on level being 9, mastery program. Wow! Mastery program. Level being 9, mastery.